Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this video on electoral systems. This is the introduction to electoral systems, and the goal of this video is to introduce some of the concepts, some of the ideas, some of the questions, some of the the basic facts that will help you understand the rest of this unit. So let's start off with that term electoral system. What do we even mean when we say electoral system? Now, I want you to imagine this. I want you to imagine we've got a legislature with 100 seats in it, okay, 100 seats. And then I want you to imagine that we have a country with 100 million people in it, for argument's sake. And then so you get 100 million votes, and you've got these 100 seats. How do we take these 100 million votes and convert them into 100 members of the legislature? Or to make it even more simple, let's say 100 MPs in the House of Commons. How do you convert 100 million votes into 100 MPs? And the answer is that there are actually different ways that you can do that. The obvious way, perhaps that you've already thought of, would be to do it as a percentage-based system. So 25% of the vote equals 25 seats in the House of Commons. And you can do that, but that's not the only way of doing it. And one of the things you're going to learn in this unit, that actually there are a variety of electoral systems, a variety of ways of converting votes into seats in a legislature. And that is at the core of this unit, and asking questions like how the system that you choose might affect the outcome of an election and what the advantages and disadvantages of that might be. So these below me here are the key questions that we will be answering in this module. Firstly, we'll be asking what electoral systems are used in the UK, because we have a variety of different elections, and different elections actually use different systems, and you need to learn what they are and where they're used. We're also going to be asking what makes an effective or an ineffective electoral system. Basically, each system that you're going to be learning about has its own strengths and its own weaknesses, and you'll probably end up with your own favorite, and I've got my own favorite, but you're also going to learn that actually some systems are better in some situations than others. For example, imagine you're electing a president. Let's think of the American system. If you're electing a president, you're electing one person. Whereas if you're electing a legislature, you've got 100 seats or 650 seats, whatever it might be. So maybe sometimes a different system might be more effective in one type of election than another. And that's one of the other concepts that you're going to be learning about. To what extent do different systems change the outcome of elections? To put it bluntly, if different systems were used, you would have different results in general elections. Not necessarily a different winner, although it could happen, but certainly a different percentage of seats that go to each party, which ultimately would affect what a government does or isn't able to do. And if you want to look at an example of where a different electoral system could have produced a different winner, we can go back over to America, and we can go back to 2016, Donald Trump versus Hillary Clinton. If they had a different system for that election, Hillary Clinton would have won, because she actually got more votes. She didn't win because of the electoral system, but she did get more votes. So it matters. The system that is used matters, and it can change the result. But do look at that little point there. It says, to what extent do different systems change the outcome of elections? So this isn't just a yes-no answer. It's a, well, where would it make a difference, and where basically doesn't it matter at all? Should the UK change which system it uses for the general elections? And one of the first topics we're going to look at in the second video is what is our electoral system for general elections, and what difference does it make, and should we change it? And then, because referendums are also a form of voting, it's not an election, but it's a form of voting, we'll be asking whether referendums undermine democracy and parliamentary sovereignty in the UK. So, like, if you have elections and then you also have referendums, do the referendums kind of harm the other elections? Do they really work together in a system? Or in fact, do they kind of work against each other and cause kind of problems? And so we'll be discussing that aspect to it as well. And we'll also be asking then, so when are referendums actually used in the UK? I think so far we've basically said when there's a big issue, but we need to be more specific than that. We need to kind of talk about when they are used and when they're not used, and perhaps when they should be used and perhaps when they should not be used. So I hope you are excited about this unit. I'm going to be honest, it's one of my favorites because it's all nerdy and logical and talks about kind of systems, and it affects real change as well and real kind of results. And so much of British politics actually comes back to the advantages and disadvantages of the electoral system. That this isn't some tiny little niche thing that doesn't really affect anything. This is a technical system that actually has a big difference to the results and outcomes of elections in this country, and therefore has a big impact on the politics of the UK as a whole. So it's a big deal. It's a big deal. Right. One of the questions was, what electoral systems are used in the UK? Let me shrink myself down here a little bit. Now, I got this from our lovely textbook. It's on page 69. I'm not going to go through this in great detail now, but I just want you to get the idea that we have different systems used at different points in the UK. And at the moment, you won't know what these systems are, and that's fine. But I just wanted to show you and give you this conceptual idea that actually there's quite a lot of different systems being used. Now let's come back. Let's look here. I'm hoping you guys can see my mouse on the video, but it says here, UK Parliament, House of Commons. It's every 5 years, and it uses a system called first past the post. And when you and me think elections, we probably instantly think general elections, which is the system that votes for the House of Commons once every roughly 5 years, although in British history at the moment, it seems to be about every 2. But that uses a system called first past the post. But it's actually one of the very few which is first past the post. If you look at this diagram, you'll actually see that most of the other elections use something different. For example, if we kind of go around clockwise, the London Assembly, so that's like where the London Mayor and the various representatives there use a system called AMS. The London Mayor itself uses a system called SV. The Police and Crime Commissioners also use SV. The Welsh Assembly, which is obviously in Cardiff, and that's a regional government, uses this AMS system, which we will learn about. The Scottish Parliament also uses AMS, and then the Northern Irish Assembly uses something completely different called STV. So let's just go around the system there. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, I think, systems used in the UK. And when we were a member of the EU and we had European elections as well, we had another system called the party list, which I want to be talking to you about at some point, which is a different system as well. You will need to kind of learn this map throughout this module, but don't attempt to learn it now. Learn what these systems are, and then it will make sense why we have different systems used in the UK, because this isn't random. It's not like they've kind of gone, Scotland, let's use this system. Ireland, let's use this system. There's nothing random here. Each system has been selected for a particular election, for a particular purpose, with the idea that this is the correct system to give us the best possible result for this particular election. And so one of the other concepts you'll be learning about is why Ireland, for example, has a different system to the rest of the UK. Why the London Mayor uses a different system to the Scottish Parliament, for example. So we'll be coming back to this map on a regular basis. Keywords. You can see what I did there, a little keyword thing going on. These are some of the terms that you're going to be learning throughout this module. I'm going to define some of them now, and other ones you'll kind of see throughout the unit kind of coming up, and just to kind of make you aware. Some of them you'll know already because we've discussed them in previous modules, and some of them will probably be new to you. The first one is I'd like to draw a distinction between the words election and an electoral system. An election is when people oh, I missed that word there. It should say when people vote to choose their leader or their representative. So an election is just when people vote. The electoral system is the process by which these votes are converted into seats in the legislature, or perhaps the process by which you vote for the leader, such as a president or someone. They are obviously very closely related words, election, electoral system, but they are different. The election is the day which people vote. It's when you know you're going to be making this kind of choice. The electoral system is actually kind of, think about it like it's how you count those votes. It's actually how you kind of put them together. And I'd like to now illustrate that a little bit more to show you why electoral systems matter. And I kind of talked about this a little bit in the introduction to this video, but I'd like to give you 2 examples here that so you can really understand why the electoral system matter. And I'm going to use 2019, the most recent general election, but I'm just going to focus in on Scotland to make a point here. Now, when you're choosing an electoral system, and I'll move myself down here, do you just prioritize the percentage of votes? Is that the best way to make a decision about seats in the House of Commons? So, and if we did that, then the SNP got 45% of the vote in Scotland, in which case you would give them 45% of the seats. And I think I've got some other things here. So just ignore this for a second and just keep looking on the right-hand side, and I'll just try and move. I've got very bars here I need to move. Let me just move some things out of the way so you can see it. So if we say, look, we want this to be a completely fair and proportional election, and so the number of votes that the party gets is going to be transformed into the number of seats that they get, then you'd use a system a bit like this. So if the SNP gets 45% of the vote in Scotland, then they would get 28 seats, because there's something like 59 seats, I think, in Scotland. The Tories got 25%, so they'd get 15. Labour gets 19%, so they get 11. The Lib Dems get 10%, so they get 5. And the Green got 1%, which actually isn't enough for an entire seat, so they get 0. And everything else below that gets 0 as well. Now, what's the advantage of a system like this? Well, we can see that the number of seats reflects the number of votes, so it's proportional, and we can see that the parties are roughly in line with how well they've done, how many people like them. So then the amount of people like them shows you the amount of seats that they get. But think about this. Most people live in cities in the UK, and whether that city is London or Manchester, whatever, or if you go into Scotland, it's going to be places like Edinburgh, Glasgow, and Aberdeen. These are the biggest places in Scotland by miles, which means that most of the votes come from those areas. So if, for example, the whole of Edinburgh voted for the SNP, that would mean that the people that live in other areas of Scotland's votes really don't matter very much at all, because there's so much more people that live in the cities that these other areas of Scotland can effectively be ignored by the political parties, or just that their votes don't count as much. So the other way, or another way, there are lots of ways of doing it, but another way you can think about electoral systems is that you could prioritize representation of a certain area. So what you do is you take a map, and here is the map of Scotland, and you chop it up into little bits. So, and then you make sure, and we call these constituencies, and you can see where I'm going with this. And what you do is you then say, right, well, what do the people that live in northern Scotland think? What do the people that live in western Scotland think? In eastern Scotland? What do the people in the cities live? And look, and more people live in the cities, so we need to give them more constituencies. So we're going to chop them up into even smaller bits to kind of make sure it's fair. But what we do here is we look per area and we say, well, what do the people in these different particular areas think? And then whoever is the most popular in that particular area gets that particular seat, which is a very different electoral system to the right. Now, if you look here on the left-hand side, if we go by a system that says who is the most popular in each area, look at the results. The SNP are the most popular party in 48 of the areas. The Conservatives were the most popular in 6 areas. Let's call them constituencies to use the right term. Labour was the most popular in 1 constituency, and the Lib Dems were the most popular in 4 constituencies. Now look at this. This is the same selection of votes. If you use a proportional system, the SNP gets 28 and the Conservatives get 15. If you use a constituency-based system, the SNP get 48 seats and the Conservatives get 6. That is a huge difference. And it gets even bigger when you start to look at Labour especially. So Labour goes from 11 down to 1. But the big difference here is if you look on this side, the SNP get 45% of the seats. That is not an overall majority. That means that in Scotland, the SNP have the largest amount of seats, but they cannot dominate the whole of Scotland using that system because they've got 45%. Now, is that good? Is that bad? You can debate that. You can say, well, it's bad because that means there's not one party with a majority, but it's good because they only got 45% of the vote. You shouldn't get 45% of the vote and have complete control. But if you do it this way, look at how dominating the SNP are if you do it this way. The SNP get 48%. That's huge. I think it's like 80% of the seats or something like that. I should probably have checked the maths before putting this video together. But you can see here very clearly the difference that the electoral system makes. If you prioritize representation for an area, the SNP shoot up. If you prioritize the percentage of votes, the SNP shoot down and the other parties shoot up. Electoral systems matter. Okay, before you move on from this slide, definitely make sure you've understood what I'm saying here, how these two different systems work and why that then impacts or could potentially impact the result that you get. So let's go back to our keywords. So we should now know what an election is. We should know what our electoral system is. Our next word has come up in the wrong order, which is party system. Now, this is normally a 3-word phrase rather than a 2-word phrase. Let's look at the definition. The party system is the number of parties that can realistically win and form a government. So you normally put a number before the word party system. So 1-party system, 2-party system, multi-party system, 3-party system, whatever. And think about the UK. How many parties can realistically win? Probably in 2019, you'd have to say we are a 2-party system. Labour could win, the Conservatives can win. The SNP can get a heck of a load of votes in Scotland, but can they win overall? No, of course not, because they don't actually stand in enough seats. But they can have an influence on the result. And then, of course, go back to 2010. We had a coalition. So maybe you could argue that we are a multi-party system. Now, the party system matters for electoral systems because if we are a 2-party system, you might choose one particular electoral system. If we are a multi-party system where there's actually lots of different parties, you might actually say, well, we need a different system to go with the different amount of parties that are actually involved in these elections. So that's a phrase that's going to be coming up a lot. And it's a debate that we'll kind of be having ongoing about whether we are a multi-party system or a 2-party system. You could even argue that some places are a 1-party system. You know, if the SNP are dominating Scotland right now, you know, are they a 1-party system? Maybe, maybe not. Those are some of our keywords. Now, the other words we're going to be talking about, I've given a big list on the right-hand side here, and some of them you've learned already, but many of them we knew. We've got legitimacy, mandate, participation, turnout, majority, plurality, proportional, safe seats, swing seats, MP constituency link. That last one is all one phrase. And I think we've probably used about 5 of those words already throughout the course. So hopefully some of them will be familiar to you. And I'm going to be using a few just on the next slide as well. You're also going to need to know, and I know it feels like at the moment this module is huge, but I want to kind of show you everything we need to get. And then as we break it down and go lesson by lesson, it's pretty straightforward. You're also going to need to learn the different electoral systems in the UK and how they work. And we've got FPTP, which stands for first past the post, AMS, which stands for the additional member system, AV and SV, those two kind of go together because they're known as the alternative vote and the supplementary vote. We've got STV, which is the single transferable vote system. That's probably the most complex one that we'll look at. And we've got a party list system as well. So if you are able to kind of do this whole slide here with keywords by the end of this unit in a few weeks' time, then you're pretty much sorted once you understand how they work. So the final part of this video where we in this introduction to electoral systems is to ask quite a basic but important question, which is, well, why hold elections in the first place? Why do we do it? And the obvious and probably most important answer is that if you didn't, we'd be a dictatorship and we wouldn't be a democracy. We hold elections because we are a democratic system in which you and me and your parents and your families get choice. We get to choose which political parties, which views, which ideologies, which beliefs we want for our country. You know, if we want to have amazing public services and high taxes, as a country, we can choose for that. If we want to have lots of freedoms, we can choose for that. If we want to have a country that very much focuses on security and stability and policing, we can vote for that. We have choice. And whether you want to use the word like choice or democracy or what's the word, pluralism, you know, there's lots of words that you could use to kind of talk about this idea. But we hold elections because we can choose, and more importantly, and developing that point, we can choose to change as well. You know, we can change the direction our country is heading, like we famously did in 1979 when Thatcher was voted in. That changed the direction of this country. When Blair was voted in 1997, that changed the direction of this country. Arguably, when Boris was voted in to kind of reinforce the Brexit, that kind of changed the direction of this country, kind of. Second one, accountability. The ability to hold politicians to account for what they have done and say, yes, I like what you're doing, keep ruling, or to say, no, I don't like what you're doing, out you go. And the reason why I've put Gordon Brown there is because he was the last prime minister to be voted out by the electorate. I mean, if you actually think about the ones since then, you've got David Cameron and Theresa May, Boris Johnson, all of them actually were removed between elections, which is perhaps one of the quirks of our system. But Gordon Brown was the last person to actually be kind of voted out. Essentially, the voters held him accountable for what he'd done, and they decided, no, we don't think that we want you to carry on. It is important in a democracy that politicians and leaders and parties are held accountable for their actions. And accountability doesn't always mean getting rid of them. It means you can keep them. If they're doing a good job, you can like what they're doing and you can keep them going. But it also means, for example, that Donald Trump can be held accountable and could be voted out in 2000 and what are we now, 20 or 21. It also provides legitimacy. And legitimacy is the right to be in power. A legitimate leader or a legitimate party in power is one that is seen as having the permission of the people to be there. And the reason why I've put Putin there is because Putin arguably has questionable legitimacy. You guys are probably aware that if you are the leader of the opposition parties in Russia, bad things seem to keep happening to you. You might get arrested. Some of them have ended up very ill. Some of them have ended up being poisoned. And there are other countries in the world, unfortunately, where similar things have happened. So you could make an argument that whilst Putin clearly won the elections that he has been a part of, you could make an argument and say, well, how legitimate is he? How much legitimacy does he have? How much right does he have to rule? Because there is a difference between having power and having the right to have that power, the democratic right to have that power. And the idea is that our elections provide legitimacy, permission for these rulers to be in place. I'll give you two clear examples here. So let's go over to America to get these very, very clear examples. So Ronald Reagan in 1980 was American president, and he got something ridiculously high. It was like 60%, 70% of the vote. I don't think it was quite that high, but it was high. He got a high percentage of the vote. He was legitimate. Donald Trump, as I mentioned earlier, did not get the majority of the vote. And you could argue that impacted his legitimacy. And legitimacy is not an off-on thing. It's not like you are legitimate or you're not legitimate. It is something which you can argue and debate to what extent someone is legitimate. And so on. And obviously, come back to the UK, the more seats that a party has, the more legitimate we might say they are. And if there has been an election or there has not been an election, that makes a difference as well. So let's go to Theresa May and David Cameron. David Cameron resigns in 2016. Theresa May comes into power in the UK, but without an election. How legitimate is she? And it's debatable. You can say, well, she's legitimate because she's the leader of the Conservative Party and there was an election back in 2015. Or you can say, well, hang on a minute. It was David Cameron that was elected in 2015. Where's Theresa May's legitimacy? And that's perhaps one of the reasons why she called a general election in 2017. And of course, you probably know that it didn't go all that well for her. But legitimacy is the right of a leader or a leadership party to be in power. And these are the three main ones. Okay, I'm going to show you three more, but these are the three main ones: to provide democratic choice, to provide democratic accountability, and to provide legitimacy for our leaders. This is why we hold elections. So if the election does not provide good quality choice, good quality accountability, and good quality legitimacy, you could argue that the electoral system is probably not all that useful. And so when we're looking at electoral systems, I want you to kind of bear these three ideas in mind and think about to what extent you think that the system provides legitimacy. And I wasn't planning on doing this, but now it's just occurred to me. If I just go back to this example I showed you here, we're using Scotland as an example, which one of these two systems do you think provides the best choice, the best legitimacy, and I've forgotten the other word, and the best accountability? But let's just focus on the other two. You know, which is more legitimate? Is it more legitimate to say you've got this percentage and therefore you've got the seats, or is it more legitimate to say we want representation from each particular area and we want every area of Scotland or the UK to have their own representative to make sure all the different views are heard? I honestly don't know what the right answer is there. I think you can make a case for both, but where's your heart at the moment? Which feels more legitimate to you? let's come back to our last question. So there's going to be three more things here that are going to pop up on the board. These ones are less important than the others by far. So there's a big gulf between the top row and the bottom row, but they're still worth talking about. So why else hold elections? The first one, apparently this is in white, it didn't come out well, it's limiting power. I've got a calendar here. Politicians always know that their time in office is limited. Even Boris Johnson right now, the next election is like 3 years away, but he knows it's coming. And so he knows that he will be accountable to the electorate in 3 years' time. And he has to prepare for that. He has to make sure that what he does is important. Hey, Cara. Now Cara is a quality part of this week's lectures. That's exciting, isn't it? That is cool. He's so famous right now. So it provides this, it limits the power by saying there is a date at which you will have to stand for election again. You could make an argument that actually our politicians kind of have unlimited power-ish for a particular period of time, but that election is always coming at some point. In the UK, there is a kind of a 5-year time limit on elections. In America, it's 4 years, depending on which election it is. And that time limit has changed over time, and we'll talk about that in a future lesson. It also provides an opportunity for the creation of policy. Now, one of the things that the UK does is it has manifestos, and a manifesto is basically like a book that a party writes before an election saying, this is what we will do to the UK if we are elected in office. And this was Boris Johnson's manifesto. You can see on the front, it says, get Brexit done, unleash Britain's potential. And you can see it's actually quite small. The Labour one was much bigger. And actually, they got kind of... it didn't work very well having a bigger manifesto, and we'll talk about that one as we get into a future lesson. But these manifestos mean that parties have to kind of promise what they will do, research what they will do. And they could use things like think tanks. Let's link that back to our previous topic. You know, they can use things like think tanks and their own ideas and their own ideologies to say, this is what we believe in, this is what we're planning to do, please vote for me. And so these manifestos are important. And it means that what we can do with a politician like Boris Johnson or Theresa May, whatever, is that we can, after a number of years, we can look at them and we can kind of say, well, this is what you promised to do. What did you do? And hold them accountable for that. And lastly, elections don't only provide us with choice, they provide us with individuals as well. They provide us with leaders. And by leaders, of course, I mean Boris Johnson as Prime Minister, but I also mean all the members of the cabinet, whether it's Matt Hancock, Rishi Sunak, and others. Our elections provide us with people. The textbook describes them as the political elite. I think that's a bit of a cheeky phrase, but it's true. It provides us with this kind of like leadership class in the UK. And of course, many of them go on to being members of the House of Lords as well once they retire as well. So our elections create these individuals that rule us. And they will be there for a long time because they'll be there for as long as they're elected. They are, of course, members of the legislature as well. And many of them go on to be lobbyists. But as well as being lobbyists, they often go off to be members of the House of Lords and become part of our political systems in other ways as well. So it's also a way by which the individuals become members of the political elite. I do hope some of you are considering becoming a member of our political elite one day as well. So that brings us to the end of our introduction to electoral systems. We've covered quite a lot of concepts there, and basically everything will be covered again in more detail. So if there's anything you're confused about, that's fine, but ask the questions and I'll talk to you about it more. And in the next video, we'll be looking at UK general elections, and we'll be talking about first past the post, explaining exactly how it works and talking about what the advantages and the disadvantages of that system are. I hope you're looking forward to studying the rest of this unit, complete the questions and work your way through this week's Nearpod. And I'll see you on the next one. Take care. Bye-bye.